video is about how to handle the situation if you receive a DC grand jury subpoena. It's this document here. This video is going to explain 3 important things to keep in mind if you get subpoenaed for a grand jury in the District of Columbia. First, I'm going to talk about what a grand jury is and explain some of the laws surrounding grand juries. Second, I'm going to go over what your rights are as a material witness. And then finally, I'm going to describe what you should expect and why you should consult an attorney if you are subpoenaed to a DC grand jury. And my name is Joseph Scrofano. I'm the founder and managing partner of Scrofano Law PC, where we have represented dozens of clients before grand juries in the District of Columbia. We also represent clients in Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland. So, what is a grand jury? In the District of Columbia, the law requires prosecutors to obtain an indictment to charge someone with a felony offense. To secure an indictment, the prosecutors must convene a grand jury and present evidence to that grand jury. Now, a grand jury is made up of members of the community who've been summoned for jury duty, just like a regular jury in court. However, grand jury proceedings are held in secret. The defendant or the target of the investigation has no right to put on a defense, and the witnesses are not even allowed to have their lawyers inside the grand jury. So the decision to indict is up to the grand jury. The law requires them to indict if they determine that probable cause exists to believe that the target committed the alleged offense or offenses. Now, evidence that the grand jury will consider usually involves witness testimony. The witnesses will go before the grand jurors, and prosecutors will subpoena those witnesses to compel them to come to court. Now, a subpoena, like this document here, is basically a legal document that can legally compel someone to have to appear and testify. Now, if you receive one of these, what are your rights in front of the grand jury? So you have 3 primary rights if you're subpoenaed to a grand jury. First, you have a right to an attorney. Anyone subpoenaed to the grand jury has a right to a lawyer. And in DC, if you cannot afford a lawyer when you're subpoenaed to the grand jury, the court will appoint one for you. Second, you have a right to know what the grand jury is investigating. That means the prosecutor has to tell you what they're investigating and why they think you have information that they want put in front of that grand jury. Now, finally, and this is one of the most important ones, you have a right against self-incrimination, which means you don't have to answer questions that may incriminate you. Well, the first thing you should absolutely do if you receive a grand jury subpoena is immediately contact a criminal defense lawyer. You want to talk to someone who has experience representing material witnesses before grand jury so that they can advise you, especially if you have a right against self-incrimination. Now, it's important to note that the prosecutor who subpoenaed you does not represent you or your interests. In fact, the prosecutor's job is to secure the indictment, not make sure that your interests are taken care of or protected. It's also important to note that you have several obligations once you've received a subpoena. If you fail to show up for the date on the subpoena, can request that the court issue a warrant to have you arrested. That means you can literally be locked up and arrested if you don't show up on the date you're subpoenaed for. Now, you should definitely not talk to anyone about the incident that got you subpoenaed, even the fact that you received a subpoena. You shouldn't even tell anyone you received it other than a lawyer. A prosecutor will likely ask you under oath who you communicated with about the subpoena, and they can later subpoena the people you spoke with to make sure that you told them the same thing you told the prosecutor. And in addition to that, by communicating with anyone other than your lawyer, you're actually creating more witnesses. So finally, your biggest obligation when you receive a grand jury subpoena is to tell the truth. If you testify in front of the grand jury, they will place you under oath, and lying under oath is considered perjury, and it's a felony offense in the District of Columbia. So if the government thinks that you lied under oath, it's a good chance that you could end up being a target and ultimately a defendant in a criminal case. You also have an obligation not to obstruct justice. that could result in a felony charge as well. Now, obstruction of justice is pretty broad in the District of Columbia and can include any act where you try to persuade or dissuade another witness from testifying by force, threat of force, or corruption. Getting caught up in a charge of perjury or obstruction of justice will make your situation infinitely worse. What you do not have to do is answer questions that could incriminate you. I mentioned before your right against self-incrimination. Now, if answering the prosecutor's questions could lead you to incriminate yourself, you can plead the Fifth Amendment. You hear about it all the time on TV. I plead the Fifth, or in movies. Imagine if you, and a good example of this is, imagine you witnessed a robbery in a convenience store and you were shoplifting at the time. The prosecutor could subpoena you to ask you questions about the robbery, but in answering those questions about what you were doing at the time, you could ultimately end up incriminating yourself for theft or shoplifting. In a situation like that, you will likely be able to plead the Fifth. Now, prosecutors will usually try to give witnesses assurances that they're not interested in the witness's incriminating information, that they're not, in the theft example, they're not interested in the shoplifting case, they're not interested in the theft case, they're going after the robbery incident. However, that does not make the witness's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination go away. So, if you've been subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury, you should immediately contact us so we can advise you on what next steps to take and make sure your important legal rights as a material witness are protected.